Hi, I'm Rachel, and I'm chronicling my reading for the week of March 12th through 18th, 2018. For those of you who might have been watching some of my earlier videos, you know that since early February I had been embarking on a project of reading a bunch of Virginia Woolf's novels, which I finally finished up last week. And throughout all of that time I was worried that I would not meet my weekly reading goals because of the quality of those books, but it turns out that it's this week, my first non-Virginia Woolf week, where I am falling a little bit behind. And that's due in large part to this book. This is The Price of Whiteness, Jews, Race, and American Identity by Eric L. Goldstein. It is a big nonfiction academic book, something I'm not quite so used to, but it's part of this project I'm trying to do of reading some books that were nominated for the Sammy Rohr Prize for Emerging Jewish Authors in nonfiction. And so this is the first book of the 2008 batch that I hope to read this month, and I did finally get through it. I finally finished it today, and it's a difficult book in its way. The language is quite thick and quite repetitive because the topic is really repetitive. Goldstein kind of goes through every decade, it seems, between like the 1890s or maybe 1880s or so up until the 1950s, and chronicles the ways that American Jews identified with or struggled with the idea of whiteness and where they fit into the American ideas of race. And so they went through both the non-Jewish white America's response to the Jews, and also how the Jews dealt with African Americans throughout all of those years. And the truth is, for most of those years, from the the late 1800s to the mid 1900s, there wasn't a whole lot of change in that. There's just a bunch of struggle about this idea that Goldstein goes into about Jews wanting to hold on to their particularity but also be accepted by the white mainstream. And since that's a bit of a paradox, it got a bit complicated. And then the epilogue sort of rushes through the years past 1960, where things change pretty dramatically for the Jews and for America as a whole, because our ideas about race and identity changed a lot in that time period, and it was a little bit of a rush, I guess, between the two of those. Like, it felt like the epilogue was so different from the rest of the book in a way, although not entirely. I mean, it just was, things moved a lot quicker from the bulk of this book into the epilogue. But anyway, I wanted to be kind of quick about this, and obviously I want to craft something more thoughtful to say about it, and I intend to, hopefully later this week, or maybe next week, when I sit down and do reviews of this book and the other two books for 2008 that I hope to read. So I just wanted to give a quick taste. I do think there was a lot of interesting material in here, even though it was kind of dense and repetitive, but Goldstein did his research. There's lots of quotes, lots of articles, lots of scholarship, and I think it was a little bit eye-opening in a way of getting a broader picture of what was going on during those years, and not focusing solely on a few standout people. So, you know, I'm really not that familiar with nonfiction, particularly nonfiction like this, and I'm still very fascinated by it, but it's also a bit exhausting, and I quite miss the idea of characters with emotions, because you don't get a lot of that in here. So I'm ready to go into my fiction again. And that's why today I picked up this book. This is Among the Living by Jonathan Rabb, and actually I will be discussing it with my book club on Thursday, and I'm sure I'll be finished by then. But part of the reason I read these two books in tandem is because the first book was about how American Jews deal with the idea of race, and this book is about a Holocaust survivor who comes to live with his cousins in Savannah, and his cousins have African American help, servants in various areas, and it's about the southern Savannah, Georgia Jewish community and how they interact amongst each other and how they interact with the blacks, and how this Holocaust survivor fits into all of that because he isn't ingratiated in all of the rules of race and identity that the American Jews are. And so already, you know, things have cropped up in this book that are similar to the trends that came up in that book about you know, Jews sort of struggling between worlds, as it were, about are they white or are they non-white, and how they deal with the white people and the black people around them. And I also really like how the Holocaust is dealt with so far in this book, by which I mean this character's post-trauma, and how we're focused a lot on not the specifics of what happened, but this book takes place in 1949, so it's relatively recent, and he's really just starting to come back to life. That's not really even right either, but he doesn't even know exactly what it is to feel anything after several years in a camp where, you know, your sense of humanity can get taken away from you so easily. And meanwhile, the Jewish community has very little way of coping with or understanding what happened. It took, you know, a few decades really after the Holocaust for the Holocaust to truly be grappled with and understood emotionally in any sort of way. And there's also a subplot with the American cousin. He seems to be getting involved in some shady dealings. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. And well, I'm not too far into it. I will report back when I finish, but I do have to say one of the weaknesses I think I see so far is there seem to be at least two female characters that are a little bit fragile and a little bit judgmental, and I always just, you know, get a little cautious when male authors write female characters who seem stereotypically hysterical. And so I hope there's a little bit more depth to them, especially to the one who's very much a main character, so we'll see. Okay, well, returning to my nonfiction project that I was mentioning, I have two more books from 2008 that I want to read, starting with this one. This is The Man in the White Sharkskin Suit, My Family's Exodus from Old Cairo to the New World, by Lucette Lagnado. This is actually the winner of the 2008 prize, and it is a memoir, a genre of nonfiction that I am much more familiar and comfortable with, and I will read from the flap. In vivid and graceful prose, Lucette Lagnado recreates the majesty and cosmopolitan glamour of Cairo in the years between World War II and Gamal Abdel Nasser's rise to power. Her father, Leon, was a boulevardier who conducted business on the elegant terrace of Shepherd's Hotel and later in the cozy dark bar of the Nile Hilton, dressed in his signature white sharkskin suit. But with the fall of King Farouk and Nasser's nationalization of Egyptian industry, Leon and his family lose everything. As streets are renamed, neighborhoods of their fellow Jews disbanded, and the city purged of all foreign influence, the Lagnados too must make their escape. With all of their belongings packed into 26 suitcases, their jewels and gold coins hidden in sealed tins of marmalade, Leon and his family depart for any land that will take them. The poverty and hardships they encounter in their flight from Cairo to Paris to New York are strikingly juxtaposed against the beauty and comforts of the lives they left behind. An inversion of the American dream set against the stunning portraits of three world cities, Lucette Lagnado's memoir offers a grand and sweeping story of faith, tradition, tragedy, and triumph. One thing I appreciate about this, especially after talking about these last two books, is that it is a focus on Mizrahi Judaism, that is, Jews who after the diaspora originated from Middle Eastern countries. So this is a very different history than that of the Ashkenazim, who were the majority of Holocaust survivors and the majority of the American Jewish populace, but not all of the American Jewish populace. and so it'll be nice to get another perspective. To go along with that theme, or okay, I might be taking some liberties with this comparison, I have Girls Burn Brighter by Shobha Rao. This is one of my anticipated novels of 2018, which I talked about in one of my early videos of the year, and I put it on my library holds list when the book was on order, and I got the book very quickly after publication date, which is very exciting. And I say that it's similar to the Lagnado memoir because it's about two girls from India who end up in America, I believe, and I wasn't entirely sure from the pre-publication press material how they got here, but from what I've heard from people who've read it, it seems to be largely through human trafficking. And indeed, I've heard a lot of warnings about this novel, about the sexual assault in it and how it is very harrowing. So I'm kind of, preparing myself for that because I think this is going to be pretty heartbreaking. I read a collection of Shobha Rao's short stories earlier this year, and one of them still sticks out in my head because it just made me cold and shuddery during one scene where there was a violent rape that was depicted, not even directly depicted, but certainly alluded to, and from somebody who was right outside of it. And it was very harrowing, and I'm expecting this to be even more harrowing. But otherwise, the premise seems to be about the power of female friendship and these two young girls who attempt to find each other through the poverty of their origins in India to where they ultimately end up. And I think it'll be a powerful read. I think it'll be worth it. And finally, I always seem to forget about my audiobooks, or often anyway, even when I have physical copies of them. This is the CD collection for Now We Rise by Kiersten White. You'll just have to believe me because this is indeed an interlibrary copy, and it's not really worth it to remove this thing from the CD case. See? This is the second book in the Conqueror's Saga series. It is a YA historical fiction trilogy, technically speaking, but I still think of it as speculative fiction and fantastical fiction because, after all, Kiersten White does imagine Vlad the Impaler as a girl. So it couldn't have happened this way in real life. But this is one of my favorite contemporary YA series that's going on now. I think this is just so much fun, but it's also deep waters underneath of it all. It is a retelling of Vlad the Impaler. As I said, the first book is about the reimagined Lada, and her brother Radu, who were taken as young children as hostages to the Ottoman Empire, following in a general sense with history, and they get to know the prince of the Ottoman Empire, Mehmed, who becomes the Sultan during their time there as young adults, and all of that is relatively true to form. The thing that is a little less true is that a love triangle blossoms between the three of them, with the two siblings, the female sibling and the male sibling, having deep feelings for Mehmed and so forth. But otherwise, I appreciated this love triangle because it seemed like the motivations weren't just swoony. It seemed in line with who they were as characters. And we continue in the second installment and cover the historical and reimagined fall of Constantinople. And meanwhile, Lada is on another plot as she's trying to retake her throne in Wallachia, which I'm probably saying incorrectly, but I will blame Fiona Hardingham, the narrator of this audiobook. And what I really loved about this book, I think I'm in the minority, is Radu's storyline. I think people are stereotypically drawn to the badass female heroines of YA, but I really loved Radu's storyline, and because it's one about trauma and warfare, and that is like be it to honey with me. And speaking of his love for Mehmed, it certainly changes throughout this story. So it's something where the love affair is part of the story. It's not separate from the story, and that's part of the reason why I like it. And I just in general feel like the details were so lush and so engaging. And we deal with the Constantinople storyline with politics and religion and warfare and the effects of all of those. And Lada's storyline was intriguing too, because since Lada is a woman in this storyline, she gets to sort of bristle against the men in her life, from Mehmed and Radu on downward, treating her as somebody who doesn't actually have a say over her own destiny. And in White's retelling, that's sort of what hardens Lada into this anti-hero who, at the end of the story, is making some pretty brutal choices that might lead to consequences she doesn't like in book 3. That's what it seems like to me anyway. So I appreciate that, that I think White succeeds where she wants to, where she can make you understand the motivations of her anti-hero without sacrificing the idea that Lada is an anti-hero, that she's not a wonderful person, and sometimes she's just a bad person because everyone's a bad person and she's bad the way everyone's bad, but sometimes she takes things up an extra nth because she feels so offended and threatened by this sexism pervading around her that she is belittled for having ideas about her own destiny. And again, with the relationship between her and Mehmed, I think it's quite obvious that it's not, you know, a swooning love affair of happily ever afters, but it's about two people who are in love with the idea of conquest and kind of see mirror images in each other. And so their relationship can be incredibly hot and cold. Anyway, I just love this. This is pretty much everything that I look for in epic YA fantasy, even if it is historical fiction-y fantasy. And I'm really looking forward to the final book, although I think it'll be a little bittersweet because going by history, things are not going to end well for these people. And I think that White got me very invested in the characters, or at least in Radu. Maybe he can live. You know, there's not much known about him in real history, so, you know, we could, you know, fudge history a little more than we already have. And that about covers it for me. Another reason why I didn't get through everything I wanted to this week is because I actually had a week where I got to see my family. It wasn't just cooped up reading all week, weekend anyway, and I went to Baltimore for my father's birthday, and I got to see my sister and my niece, my brother-in-law, and then on Sunday I spent a lot of time with my niece. My parents and my niece came with me back to my condo in Silver Spring, and man, you never know how fun your condo can be until a 4-year-old is imagining being a secret spy, like with your binoculars, and she moved pretty much everything in my condo into new places. Like I had a coin collection, and she's moving it from one container to the next, and moving around all sorts of things like my antibacterial little Bath and Body Works globe things, the things that she can find amusing, which is great because I don't actually have a lot of toys around my condo because she isn't here a lot, but I'm so thrilled that she enjoyed herself, and we also went downtown a bit, so that was very nice, and especially with the days getting longer, and it's a surprisingly warm Sunday for this area because the weather's been flip-flopping a bit. We might get snow on Wednesday or something, and the cherry blossoms are blooming, and it'll probably be for like 2 seconds before they die from this crazy weather, but what can we do? In the meantime, I gotta get going because, as usual, I'm talking about today and everything, but I'm filming this Sunday night, and we'll post it Monday morning, and the new work week will commence with work and reading these books I've talked about. So thanks so much for sticking with me, and I'll see you next time.